What up, Tolkien Poppers? It's Nick here with an episode for the beginning of March. Spring is on the horizon, and hopefully, with a little good weather, a good episode will just channel that good energy and that warm spring energy. But, last month I didn't have any podcast episodes, and I did have some good Substack posts, though. Don't want to toot my own horn, but I had a critical response to an article that came out in the latest issue of Amon Hen, which is the bulletin of the Tolkien Society. You can check that for free on my Substack. And then I also wrote a review for a book called Silence of the Lamb by Tim Miller, and it explores the theology of hiddenness. And it's a good book. I think you should go check it out. And if you're into process theology and open and relational theology, it was very fun. But on to the episode. So I was very excited and very lucky to get to spend time with Mercury Natis, who is an interdisciplinary doctoral research in English literature and history at the University of Glasgow. So we already know that they're going to be a badass. They're researching the queer historical context of Tolkien's early life and how these influenced his works, and they hold a previous MA in museum education and a BA in art history and draw on the methodologies of both disciplines for their literary historical practice. And their primary focus is on queer ambiguity and the fantastic prior to the 1960s identity politics boom, with special interest in camp aesthetics and performativity, the crossing of gender and sexuality taboos in the fantastic, the cultural environment of the First World War, and interdisciplinary art historical criticism. And they would also really like to be Bilbo Baggins when they grow old. So you already know that Mercury is awesome if they want to be Bilbo Baggins. But we cover all of those things in the episode and more. We talk about everything from art history to queer theory to punk rock and how it relates to orcs. So it's a fun conversation. So I'll stop yapping and I'll let y'all get to the episode. But I will have links to the show notes for all of Mercury's articles and all of the good things there. So get excited for Mercury and I's conversation. Peace. What up, Tolkien Poppers? Another episode of the podcast here. And I'm very excited because I am joined by the one and only Mercury Natis, who is an early career academic and a PhD candidate at the University of Glasgow, which, if you've been on here, you know that's just straight up badass. But they're doing their work at Glasgow with a focus on the works of J.R.R. Tolkien and queer theory and history. They're also interested in Gothic, fantastic, interwar fantasy in the First World War. And they have a BA in art history and a previous MA in museum education and museum and customer service experience. So, Mercury, welcome to Tolkien Pop.
Hello. I missed that last bit of that bio that probably shouldn't have been on there, but now you guys know I work in customer service.
So if you're trying to get a refund at Amazon, maybe Mercury can teach you how to talk to customer service.
Never. Oh, I am good. I am good. It is a cold but nice in Glasgow at the moment. So, it's not snowy like it is where you are, I'm sure.
Well, I'm in Tennessee, and so it's actually going to be uncharacteristically warm. It's going to be in like the mid 70s this week. So today it's a little rainy, a little cold, but this week, global warming is just giving the gifts that keep on giving.
Exactly what it's like here. It's like this is a beautiful day for the first day of March. Okay. Oh,
So so you're in Glasgow,
yeah.
doing the thing. So besides it being cold, what else? I don't know. Tell us what's going on in your life. Tell us about the PhD program. Tell us about all the good things, or even the bad things. I don't know.
Um, it's all really good. Both you and I are ADHDers, and so everything is chaos all the time.
Yes.
Um, the PhD is PhDing. I'm in my almost in second year now. I'm technically a year and a half in, though it feels like much more. It's interdisciplinary, so it's history and Tolkien studies, or rather English literature with the focus on Tolkien studies. At the fantasy program at the University of Glasgow, which I will plug always. And speaking of, I'm going to plug GIFCon because I'm on the committee for GIFCon.
Hell yeah.
It is the Glasgow International Fantasy Conversations, because it's not actually conference, it's conversations. It's completely free, it's completely online. The theme this year is technologies of the fantastic. That could be anything from sci-fi to magic systems. We were very, very broad with that. Papers are all submitted. We're doing scheduling at the moment, but it's going to be in May. And if anyone wants to hang out with pretty much the coolest group of scholars ever, everyone who comes to GIFCon is really cool. It's a really young, really like fresh fantasy and sci-fi academic crowd. And it's going to be really good.
Dude, yes, I'm gonna link it because I think I've only watched one online GIFCon before, and it was amazing. And all of the work and papers that continue to come out of there is just awesome. I mean, it's Glasgow, you know. I mean, y'all are fucking killing it over there. So
How filthy can I be in the words that are about to come out of my mouth?
go. You can be as filthy as you want.
Okay, so my favorite thing about GIFCon, right, is that it is the only academic, it's not probably not the only, but one of the only places where you can hear someone say the phrase eating pussy in an academic context. And this was specifically about fairy fruit and like queer readings of fairy fruit. It was so fucking good. It was so good. And there was a whole panel on monster fucking and like a whole really, really good panel on Omegaverse. Like, and it's all academic. It's not just like, and I love fandom bullshit. Don't get me wrong. I love fandom bullshit, but it wasn't fandom bullshit. It was like academic discussions of
Oh
these
yeah.
things. It's really, really cool.
I remember the first time. So because we dabble in theology and stuff, and we've had conversations. And so I went to a theology conference about John Wesley, and one of the scholars there, she gave a paper on John Wesley, and it was like about fucking the text. And I was
Amazing.
like, and of course, if you can imagine Wesleyan theological context in the United States is a bunch of old dudes who go to evangelical churches hearing this young woman say that she's fucking John Wesley's, text. And it was just awesome.
I love that. I love that. That is everything I want to see in the world.
Yes. Yeah. So, you go to GIFCon, everyone, and you could get all of that and possibly more.
There's probably going to be less of that this year because the theme is
Okay.
not as spicy and fun. I mean, it's fun,
Yeah.
but spicy and fun in a different way from the queer theory one. But there will probably be something. I know a friend of mine has a paper. Oh, I can't talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it. A friend of mine has a very interesting paper that kind of goes in that direction. But but yeah, no, it's going to be good. I'm plugging it. Everyone should go. It's going to be
Yep.
fun.
We'll link it. We'll link it. Um, so yeah, Mercury. I guess before diving in, we've heard a little bit what's going on, a little about GiveCon. Um, just diving into your work and scholarship, could you tell us about when you first got connected to Tolkien? Because this is a Tolkien podcast. People will want to hear your story. Like, what drew you in, and then what has kept you engaged with Tolkien and his work, and obviously to the point where you're doing your PhD on him.
I have a unusual sort of story. Not unusual as unusual at trying to figure out how to phrase it. It's not that unusual now, but it's not usual to hear when people talk about it, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um, because I'm one of those people who came to Tolkien through the Jackson films. I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD. I loved reading my whole life, but sitting down and reading The Lord of the Rings was just not going to happen.
Right.
Um, it was just not going to happen. But then the Jackson films came out, and I was just like hooked, absolutely sucked in. And that's when I read The Hobbit. That's when I read The Lord of the Rings. And then I got super in Silmarillion fandoms. which was just taking off at this time. Like Silmarillion fandom, and this is probably why Sauron is such a big deal in my head, a part of it. But Silmarillion fandom was like a huge part, more than anything else. It kind of then died out, and I had other interests in ADHD, be ADHDing, and you go all over the place. And then COVID happened, right? And at the same time that COVID happened, so we're all locked inside. And I sort of hit rock bottom professionally in my life. I was not happy with what I was doing. And I kind of gave myself a year to like figure out what I want to do with my life, right? And at the same time, I was like, I'm going to reread The Lord of the Rings because we're stuck inside and no one's doing anything. And I got completely sucked back in. And then in Kismet, a moment of Kismet, the Tolkien Society seminar on diversity happened.
Oh, yeah.
And I attended that. I was like, sure, that sounds fun. And I had like made a comment about Maithros and Fingon and chivalric romance in the chat. And Cami Egan, actually, I told her the story and she was very touched. Cami Egan responded to that going, write that academic paper. And I was like, wait, I can write academic papers on this? That would be amazing. I love this stuff. So that's kind of just how I fell into it. And then literally, this was just a perfect moment of Kismet, right? Like, because also Nature of Middle Earth had come out at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a footnote in Nature of Middle Earth that Carl Hostetter hates when people say it is about queerness, and it is, and he's wrong.
Amen. Amen.
And so, like, I had just my confidence. I don't know where I found this sudden burst of confidence, but I just like did an analytical tweet thread of this, right? And I was just like, "Here's what's happening in this footnote. Here's my like long analysis of it," and that took off. That tweet thread was like got everywhere. Like Sarah, this is how I met Sarah Brown. Like this is how I met all of these wonderful, amazing people. And like I realized, sorry, this is like a weird rant, but I realized that I'm kind of a jack of all trades kind of person. I have lots of disparate interests. I've said before, like there's about 5 different things I could potentially do a PhD in because I just have a lot of very disparate interests. But I realized from my work in museums, which had kind of failed me and I hated, was that it doesn't matter to me as much what the subject is as the people I'm working with, right? Yeah. Because I get very interested in a whole lot of things. I could dig deep and get really interested in pretty much anything on my list, But the people that I met in Tolkien scholarship and like the lefty Tolkien circles,
oh yeah,
were the most supportive, encouraging, wonderful people. That it was just like I could be happy doing this for the rest of my life with these people. And you need sort of to have something that charges the battery. It can't just be a thing that you love because there are lots of things you can love. The world is an incredibly rich place with incredibly rich things,
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of how I ended up here. And I was sort of thinking, well, what is something really interesting that I have to say that hasn't been said, and is valuable? And I got stuck in. And I realized I had a question, right? And I've realized that this is sort of the question I'm trying to answer with my thesis, which is why this is sort of the crux of the question, right? It's not the question I'm answering in my thesis, but it's the question I'm kind of answering in my head, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That
motivates my like desperate need to like answer the question. I need to find the research. I need to figure this out. It needs to make sense. And that question was, why are Sam and Frodo so different? Right? So like, why? There's lots of really emotional, there's lots of really loving friendships. There's lots of really loving relationships between male characters in The Lord of the Rings that like, it's very clear that it's just a really passionate friendship, like Merry and Pippin, for example. Great example. Why are Sam and Frodo different? What is happening here that makes Sam and Frodo different? And why is it the case? Because it's not just shipping lens, right? Because there are lots of people who ship Merry and Pippin, and there's lots of people who ship like all sorts of wonderful things. And that is great. And that's amazing. this is different. And I sort of like, that was the question I sort of dug into and went, I need to figure out why this is different.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I am now in my working on my thesis.
That's so cool. No, I love, like, I appreciate you sharing, because even like the memories of that Twitter thread that you did, like it's coming back to me. Like I remember that thread, and I remember that's probably just like a lot of people in the Tolkien community probably got connected to you, at least in the academic world, because people were like, "This is badass," and like you said, people like Sarah Brown and Robin Reed and Cami Egan are just the most supportive people and make you want to um, just do this forever, like you said. And like you said, they encourage you to take the steps, and you're like, I can do this, and they tell you, which is just the best. Um, man, I'm just thinking of your Sam and Frodo question now, because I won't take us down that road. I mean, I guess if we want to, but now I'm like, it is different. And even Frodo as an individual and Sam as an individual, and how just widely different they are. And
See
like you
my
said, the
thesis.
coming together. Yeah. See,
See my thesis in 5 years' time. There's it was actually really funny because when I was doing my outlining, right, I was like, oh, I was talking to Claire Moore. Claire Moore, I know, friend of the pod and friend of me.
oh
I
yeah.
was talking to her about how I don't know if there's anything new that I have to say about Frodo and Sam because everything's been said to death. And then I figured out something new I have to say about Frodo and Sam. So there is something there, but it's not, I guess this is kind of back to answering your question, right? What keeps me engaged with Tolkien and his work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because answering a question is a, ADHD hyperfixation. I need to answer this question. But a lot of this work that I'm doing, which again, see my thesis in 5 years' time, um, isn't, it's half history, right? It's half a
Yeah.
history PhD and half a literature PhD. So the
Mm-hmm.
literature stuff is like the stuff I've talked about already all leads. If you've seen any of my work, right, with a few exceptions. So the Squint-Eyed Southerner stuff is an exception, and the dwarves stuff is an exception. But like all of my queer theory stuff, so my queer theory stuff, not my critical race theory stuff, but my queer theory stuff is all sort of leading in that direction. So you can kind of get an impression of where I'm going without saying too much.
Yeah.
But the history side of it, what keeps engaging me with Tolkien every time is just Tolkien.
Mm.
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I whenever I sort of get into this place where like there's a lot of far right grumbling about the kind of person that Tolkien was, or a lot of, the old favorites of biography in which people are saying the kind of person Tolkien was. I just have to go back to his letters and I just have to go back to his poetry and be like, what are you seeing?
Right.
Because that's not here. And it's just there's something about John Ronald the person, right? Who I'm a biography bitch. Like that's just who I am. I care. It's how I was when I was doing art history. I really care about the artist. And the artist to me is the most important thing. The art it's a conversation you're having with the artist at the end of the day.
Mm.
And the I just always come back to John Ronald, I just come back to this guy who, while politically, I suppose, though we can argue that because I don't actually think that's necessarily true. I think it's reductive.
Yeah.
Though politically, me and Tolkien may be like completely on opposite sides of a political spectrum. I don't necessarily think that's true, but we'll just go with that. Um, I relate to him a lot in like the way that he speaks and the way that he thinks about himself and the way that he thinks about art.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and this sort of like constant thread of like, this is a very depressed man.
Yeah.
This is a very depressed man who doesn't have the language to talk about that the way that we do now. Um, Not to armchair psychologist, but he probably had ADHD.
Yeah.
Like
No doubt.
Like there's a great. Have you read the Clyde Kilby Tolkien and the Silmarillion book?
No, I have it and have not dove in.
It's tiny. Definitely like knock it out in a couple of days. It is
Okay.
actually, I think, the best biography we have of Tolkien.
Really?
Not because it like is extensive or covers his entire life or anything like that, but it gives you a picture of the man
Mm.
that I think is more reflective than Tom Shippey, than Humphrey Carpenter, than Holly Ordway, than even Verlin Flieger, though she comes, I think, closest, because he's having an actual conversation with Tolkien, right?
Right.
And he's describing Tolkien in his environment in those last years of his life. And it's so vivid. And man, this guy had ADHD. Like I cannot even tell you as an ADHDer, I'm like, oh, so the thing that you're doing right now, yeah, that's a thing. It's just like he's just he's just a little guy. He's grandpa and he's a little guy, and I feel very fond for him. And that's what keeps me, here. I feel very strongly about depressed grandpa.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What you're saying resonates with me. On like the ADHD level, and even like the way that you're talking, where something reminded me of like my experience in undergrad, where I found out like I'm into process philosophy and theology, and I remember hearing about Alfred North Whitehead, who's the kind of the figurehead. And when my professor at the time explained it, it just like clicked for me. It was like, oh, like this resonates with my experience, whatever. And I had not read Lord of the Rings for very similar reasons that you said. Grew up watching the movies, loved it, had undiagnosed ADHD, books I could not sit down to read. But I eventually read The Lord of the Rings in undergrad, and it just, like you said, that same experience of just something just clicked where you're like, yeah, I understand, I get it, or whatever that experience is.
Yeah, and I think like I'm gonna get a little heavy here, right? So for context, um, I think every person, The Lord of the Rings is a as we all know, is a very complex book with a lot of stuff going on. Um, for me, I care a lot less about the Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli plotline, for
Mm.
example. I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in there. I don't really care about the Rohirrim. I don't really care about Gondor. What I care about is Frodo and Sam and their journey and Gollum. And what I care about is the scouring of the Shire. And what I care about is this, what is more, at least in my opinion, this is me talking about my opinions rather than me citing my sources and so on. But I feel like when Tolkien was writing the medievalist plotline, he was
Yeah.
doing it as an academic in a lot of ways,
Mm.
right? He's
Yeah.
thinking, okay, what is this fairy fantasy I want to be creating with all of my historical knowledge as a scholar of Old English, right? But when he was writing the Frodo and Sam plotline, like we know that there are tear stains on the draft of Mount Doom. I believe that is correct,
I think
right?
that's right. Yeah.
Um, that is coming from a much more personal place. That is coming from I survived the First World War, and we all know this. Like he John Ronald, the denier of all things allegory, outright said the trenches inspired this. Like the fact that he actually said that is enough, you know. But the there's something about like Frodo and Sam's journey that is so it is a work of artistic mastery, I
Mm.
think,
Mm.
because art is supposed to trigger something in your body, right? Art is not just an intellectual exercise. An essay is an intellectual exercise. Art is a process of engaging with feeling and communicating feeling. And even when you're doing art as an intellectual exercise, like a good example is 1984, George Orwell, right?
Yeah.
It is incredibly intellectual. He is making a point. He is telling you a thing as a political treatise, but you can feel his rage.
Yeah.
It is an expression of his feelings about this that you get in the arts that you don't get in essays. And there is something about Frodo's journey that just reaches out of the page and hurts.
Mm.
Um, and this is where I'm going to get a little bit heavy. I was actually, with the world being in the state that it is at the moment, right?
Right.
Um, and everything is just extremely heavy and extremely difficult. Um, I was talking to my therapist. So, hello, the podcast audience. You're not going to hear what conversation I had with my therapist. Um, it doesn't matter what we were talking about, but she was saying like, why is Frodo your favorite character in Lord of the Rings? Because it was relevant. We were talking about it. She was like, so why is Frodo your favorite character in Lord of the Rings? Because he is. And I was saying, it's because, or she was saying like, who's the character you connect the most with, which is also the same question, really. And I said Frodo, and I said to her, I was like, the thing with Frodo, right, is that he's such a small little guy. He's such a small little guy in this world that is so horrible. He's in this horrible place. He has this impossible task. It is repeatedly stated that it's an impossible task, but he has to do it anyway. And he does it anyway. And he goes through all of this turmoil, knowing that he's just going to fail. There's no way he can succeed. He's just a little guy in the face of this incredible machine that wants to completely destroy him and everything that he loves. But he does it because it's the right thing to do. And he keeps going because he has to. Because it's again the line invented for the Jackson films, which is a perfect microcosm, I think, of the book in general, is the what are we fighting for? What are that there's this good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and
Oh
it's worth
yeah.
fighting for. And but also the fact that one, he doesn't do it alone. He can't do it alone. Even when he's completely broken, even when he's at his absolute worst mentally, physically, completely dragged down, another person who loves him is carrying him up the mountain. And he fails. And
Mm.
it doesn't matter that he fails because he tried,
Yeah.
you know? Like it's all of those things that are like so incredibly rich in a way that I feel like you don't quite understand if you've never experienced severe depression. That it just sings off the page.
Yeah.
And I cry every time. Mount Doom is my favorite chapter of the entire book. Like it is
Mm.
just so good. But yeah.
No, thanks for sharing. That is so. I just appreciate you sharing your experience and getting heavy, because I think a lot of people who have experienced depression and other things like that will hear that and probably are just nodding their heads and saying yes, and probably just um wanting to go back to that chapter, going back to Frodo. And I think one of the interesting things about just being a Tolkien fan, as well as being engaged in Tolkien research and scholarship, is that there's not a scholar or a researcher that I don't know who's not a lover of Tolkien, right? And I guess even fans, there's not a fan I don't know who is not a super nerd about a certain specialization of Tolkien that I will never know, right? There's fans that are like can speak freaking Quenya and know can construct pseudo or neo Sindarin, and I'm like, I will never be there. That is just insane, you know.
I
But
have yeah. I was just gonna say like I have quite a few friends who are like big language nerds, and I'm like, can you explain the language thing to me, please? Because I can barely speak English. Let's just
same.
give me all the language notes. I don't understand it. That's nice that you have that. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, enjoy your linguistics. I'm
Yeah,
going to do I will be on the lit side of this lang divide.
exactly, exactly. And I'm an art critic at heart, like my background's in art history, my background's in museums, like I am an art critic. That is what I do. And
Yeah.
it's artistry, and it's the artistry that is the most impressive to me, is when he really reaches in and creates something beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And so, and I think this comes out in your work. And I know that going back to your Twitter thread and like going on to your talks and your reviews, I've been able to see your work, not just from Tolkien Society or other conferences that you've done, but also being involved with Malorn. I've been able to like read your reviews as they come in before everybody else. And so I've been able to like geek out and, and get stoked on your work. But like there's a leg specifically, you brought up the gender and queer aspect of your research, and like there is a legacy of queer and gender studies in Tolkien studies, and legitimately I see you as like a front runner in the current generation of that. So I guess could you kind of bring us a little even more into a hyper speciality, and tell us about how you got like involved in queer and gender studies too.
That's really, really kind of you to say. I really appreciate it. Um, it's really, really sweet of you. Thank you. Um, I mean, the thing with being in queer and gender studies is it's one thing to come at a specialization from the outside, it's another to come to it from the inside. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I'm interested in queer theory and gender studies because I live it every
Mm,
day.
mm,
Um, I am every single definition of the word queer that you could probably come up with describes me in one way or another. It's just a part of my being. And when I discovered queer theory as like a thing, I was like, oh, this is it. This is everything. And again, gender studies, growing up a queer little AFAB person, you have to experience gender studies in the world. It's just how you exist, and you have to navigate the world in that way. Um, my interest in sort of queer theory as a discipline, I suppose, comes out of my art history background.
mm,
Because I've always been someone interested in sex and sexuality. It's something I've always had an interest in. I almost did an MA in one of my ideas for an MA, rather, or a PhD. I apologize. One of my ideas for a PhD before I quit museums entirely was to do something on sex education in museums.
mm.
Sort of how, with sex education lacking in schools, right, being as it is, all museums have something explicit in their collection. It might be in a box, in a cupboard, in an archive, but they have it. And these objects get hidden away, they don't get put on display, or they don't get described in a way that's really effective. And we can use these objects to sort of talk about how people in the past engaged with sex and sexuality, and how that is not, how there is not, how human experience may not be a genealogy, but it is continuous. And so, how someone in ancient Rome experienced sex and sexuality might theoretically and intellectually be very different from how we're experiencing it now. But
Right.
the embodied experience is not never going to be as different, because
Mm,
the human
mm.
body is the human body, and the way that we relate to each other in space doesn't change. Um, it's just how we conceptualize it that changes. It's the rules we put on society. It's the rules we put in our social engagement that changes. But the physical body and the experiences of the physical body, that doesn't change. So I've always been really interested in that. And then on top of that, and I think this is probably the case for most people in our current generation of queer theory, literature, and media studies scholars, I was big in fandom, like I was in fandom since I was maybe 12, and I'm 30, almost 35 now. I'm 35 now. And I've been doing that since I was 12. I don't really do it anymore, just because I don't want my wires to get crossed. I take that very seriously. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see something in fandom and then misconstrue that as canon, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Because I'm a scholar, I need to be crisp and clear with what I'm talking about. Um, but when you grew up in fandom in the aughts, it was aggressively queer space. Um, and there's a common um it's what's his name? Henry Jenkins, I think his name is. Henry Jenkins. Big original scholar of fandom studies, right?
Yeah.
Him and a lot of other people were saying how interesting it is that most people writing gay smut on the internet are straight women. Cut to 10, 15, 20 years later, a lot of these people are trans men. A lot of these people are either genderqueer or trans men or have transitioned in some way or another. Because fandom has provided this incredible space to experiment, this
Mm.
incredible place to like interrogate and investigate bodies that don't look like yours, um, experiences that you may not want to experience in the real world, but you want to in erotica. Um, it's just an incredible playground. And I think a lot of people in our generation probably come out of this same place. Um, and then sort of it all kind of became this amalgamation of like, actually, this is what I love to do. This is something I'm very interested in. I think queer theory is could save us all if we gave it a chance.
I agree.
Um, and it is just a wonderful, exciting place to be. And I'm navigating sort of at the moment, the differences in methodologies between disciplines with regard to
Mm.
this. Because literature and history do this very differently. Um, and Tolkien Studies is 40 years behind either of them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am at the moment with that. If that answered your question at all.
No, that was great. I appreciate it. And and somebody, because obviously we haven't had like a really in-depth conversation outside of just kind of texting back and forth in different chat rooms and then also with researching Tolkien. But you talking about like potentially changing your academic focus to like sexuality. Like I also was looking after my undergrad into looking at what would it look like to do like a psychological master's with the focus on sexuality and bringing a religious element to it growing up because like you said growing up like sex and sexuality was something that I was always fascinated with and especially in like a conservative religious element those things were not okay and I
Yeah.
remember when I experienced it and nothing felt bad, you know? And it was one of
Yeah.
those things where it was like, where's the guilt? Where is this thing? And I found out how lucky I was kind of being a cishet dude, right? And I think especially in that space, a lot of women in particular I noticed did not have the same experience or I felt fear, right? And it comes from this external point where there was this paradox of like, sexuality's bad unless you're a dude, right? Because then that's just how you're made, right? But if you're
Mhm.
a woman, right, you have to remain pure, and then of course it's confusing when people start having sex. So anyway, this is I'll connect it to the experience, but it just reminded me a lot of even my college experience with in connecting it with yours and your experience there, um, and then turning to fandom to kind of explore that stuff, right? Um,
Yeah.
and just and learning queer theory from you and others, and particularly in the theology realm, has really kind of opened my eyes and been a welcoming space where it's just expanded my horizons. You know what I mean? And I think to bring that into Tolkien studies, like you said, we're 40 years behind in this space, and I just can't emphasize how important your work and others in this space is for fans in particular in our conversation, but I think in scholarship, just because we like we talked before the podcast started, they're just so in tandem with one another, you know?
Yeah. I think to fill people listening in about what that conversation was, we were talking about how Tolkien fandom and Tolkien scholarship, from my experience, are the most connected scholars to fans community that there is. We were thinking maybe other exceptions might be Star Trek and the Doctor Who, where the scholars are in full conversation with the fandom. But I don't know because I'm not actually in those scholarly circles. I don't know how connected they are. But I think people, both scholars and fans, don't realize how lucky they are to have this connection.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a lot of sort of attempts to sort of divide people, to say, oh, we don't need scholars or we don't need fans. But this dialogue is really important, and this dialogue makes this fandom what it is. um, and makes the scholarly community what it is in a lot of ways. But I think to go back to what you were saying before, um, I'm a big believer that um, as long as no one else is getting hurt, do what feels good.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
Um, because there is nothing more joyous in the world than joy.
Yeah,
There's nothing
totally.
more joy. Yeah, and it's just like it's society has a, and this is so, I guess, fundamental to queer theory, right? In a very broad sense. Queer theory is very complicated. It's one of those things that like you get a bunch of people in a room and everyone's going to fight and argue. um, but one of the things that's really fundamental to this, to the idea of queer theory, right, is this undermining of the structures of power.
Yeah, yeah,
And this idea that to be outside of the structures of normativity, to question and undermine the structures of normativity, is a gift. It's a play space. It is a way in which you can engage with the world in a meaningful way that speaks to the multiplicity of reality, as opposed to like these rigid boxes that we put ourselves into. Um, and I think queer theory is really very good at this in a way that a lot of people are, a lot of fields aren't. Um, there's a great, oh, I don't remember which essay it was. I think it was Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, Paranoid Reading, which everyone should read. It's a really great essay. Um, in which, and the full title is Paranoid Reading, or I bet you thought this essay was about you, or something like that. It's that quote. I'm misquoting it because I'm terrible with direct quotations. But there's a reference that she makes, I think, in the beginning of this essay, if not this one of her other ones, in which she talks about queer theory as accessing this child space of a questioning why,
yeah, yeah,
of queer theory doing the thing that all children do before they're told to stop asking questions, which is ask why to everything and go, why have you said that this is the rule? Because that doesn't make sense to me in the way that I'm seeing the world outside of that. Why? But in this sort of like curious, playful child way that wants to understand the world, but also sees reality, sees the world and is being told something else. Before children get that sort of metaphorically beaten out of them.
yeah, yeah. No, as a kid who also asked why constantly, yeah, and maybe there's some, you know, I don't know. I just love that. I just love that. But thanks for sharing that. Go read it, everyone. Um, so speaking of joy and just like why and looking at things that we enjoy and bringing that to the table of in dialogue with other aspects of our lives, you know, for people who know you, your love and interest in Sauron is known by people, right? But we know your love for Sauron. But for those who do not share in the knowledge of your standing of Sauron, like why is Sauron such a focus for you, and how does he connect to your work, and even I guess in your fandom as well?
Oh, Sauron. uh, I don't know how I got here. I'm not mad about it, but I don't know how I got here. um, I had a really good thought about this, and now it has completely escaped me. So bear with me while I go on a little bit of a journey. Um, for the first thing I think is most important about this conversation, right? The most important thing to clarify off the bat is that there is a difference between being really, really interested in Sauron and finding him really, really fascinating as a character and approving of what he's doing. Sauron is a fascist, very much a fascist, and fascists can go in the bin. Um, but my interest in Sauron is kind of like I also really am interested in Hannibal Lecter as a character. Like I find villains really interesting. And so there's an episode of Queer Lodgings that I did with Cameron Borquin, in which we were talking about Sauron and Melkor, the ship Angbang, and we had a whole conversation about it.
Such a great episode.
I don't I don't listen to myself back, so I will not be listening to this back. So I hope it was good. The um One of the things that I thought was really important to talk about is how like kink space and fandom space is really good, and especially horror is really good at this. Like the two groups of people who are really, really good at this are kinksters and horror girlies.
Mm.
Really, really good at separating what is interesting and exciting from what you actually approve of in real life. Um, and I think people struggle with that a lot these days. But no one's better at it than kinksters and horror girlies because you can watch a slasher and be like super invested in it, or you can do a really hardcore, intense scene and then go back into your real world and be a radical leftist activist.
Yeah.
And the two things are not in contradiction to each other. This is you're in a fun play space where everyone has agreed on the terms versus going outside into the real world where people actually get hurt. Um, and that's sort of I talk about that a little bit in that episode. But so my love and interest of Sauron, very importantly, is not I'm not like poor little meow meowing him the way that people do Kylo Ren, which drives me insane. Um, I think he's a very interesting character. Um, my interest in Sauron originally started with, again, as I said, being in Silmarillion fandom. Um, and hilariously, I realized that the visual type that everyone has of Sauron in the First Age from that boom of Silmarillion fandom is pretty much my favorite go-to type. I love the fiery middle manager redhead who is having a stress. I don't know why. I just love them. But now my love of Sauron has evolved. It has evolved quite substantially because so I'm not an expert in the First Age. Cameron Borquin will tell you literally everything about Sauron in the First Age. That's not where my work is now. My work is very much Second and Third Age. And the reason I'm particularly interested in this is again, I'm working on that question I'm trying to answer, right? Like, why are Frodo and Sam different? And in the research that I've done and in sort of like the evolution of my thinking, right? Sauron comes into this because Sauron is, if there are any, and this is stuff I go to, I've mentioned this enough in papers that are out there that I can say this, even though it is thesis related. Um, but like the clearest queer coding in the entirety of Tolkien's Legendarium are going to be Sauron and Bilbo. They're
Mm.
your clearest examples, right? And again, see my thesis in 5 years' time, in which I'm really digging into this. But Sauron is a very clear example of a queer coded villain. It's extremely clear. And I've sort of been like trying to untangle why untangle isn't the right word. My interest in Sauron and why he's a focus and how he connects to my work is that at some point, Tolkien decided to take this bit character from the First Age and make him the villain of the story. And he decided that in around that time in which he decides that the ring is going to be the thing, right? So he's going through his mythologies. He's trying to figure out like what is he going how is he going to put these pieces together? And I believe so. I'm sure someone's going to, well, actually, me on this. I apologize. My dates, I'm really bad at dates. I have a whole timeline. I have it all written down. They don't stick in my head. I believe this is about the time when he starts rethinking the Numenor narrative as well. And so he's rethinking the Numenor narrative while he's writing The Lord of the Rings. These are not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Because he's building the background of Sauron. He's trying to like make sense of the fact that Sauron is now the big bad. So Second Age and Third Age Sauron are radically different from First Age Sauron because it is a different thing that he's doing here. And so what I find really interesting and how it's relevant to my work, and I've said this in a few different papers, is that the ring is, for all intents and purposes, a stand-in for Sauron. The book is titled The Lord of the Rings. Sauron is the title of the book.
Yeah.
He is there the whole time. I think the readings who say Sauron is not there, he's not a presence, he's not here, are wrong. He is there. He's there from the moment that ring is present on the page. And you see it if you like pay attention to small details. You start to see right from the beginning, it's already having an effect on Frodo, right from the beginning. And the things that the ring does are the same things that Sauron does in the Second Age. It's his seduction mechanism. It's this desire to seduce and corrupt that he's very good at in the Second Age. And in the Second Age, it's aggressively queer-coded. Like, our Farazan is besotted by him. That is the specific word that he uses, besotted. And if you want, you can see my Sauron's Femme Fatale sources paper in which there is a specific biblical reference that Tolkien uses to describe the way that Sauron talks, which is about the Ishazara, which is a biblical femme fatale. So it is not an accident that Sauron is this kind of character, right? So he is a very heavy sort of queer presence in The Lord of the Rings. Now, it is a very negative queer presence. It is not the only queer presence in this story. I very clearly say both Bilbo and Sauron are very clear archetypes. Bilbo is extremely positive. So it's not one or the other. It's not Tolkien going wholesale queer people are bad. Here is this villain, you know. But as someone who loves a villain, I just love a villain. I love a queer-coded villain. I love Ursula. I love Hades. I love Jafar. I love Scar. I grew up on my queer-coded villains, you know? I love them. I find it very interesting. I also think it's a really important discourse that's happening in the pages of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So it is very much part of my thesis, and it is fascinating to me. I just love a baddie.
Baddies are so real. They're so fun. I love it. It reminds me of people who get mad because people want to see stories where the good guy defeats the villain, right? And then they're like, just like Lord of the Rings. And you're like, that is not the Lord of the Rings, my friend. And like you were talking about, the people who create this weird construction of Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, and you're just like, how are you getting this? Like, how are you getting to that understanding of that this is how the book is functioning? To the point, like what you said, Sauron is literally the title of the book.
It's literally the title of the book. Like, it just drives me crazy. I'm just like, what? what do you mean? People who are like, he's not here. You don't see him ever. And I'm like, he is pervasive throughout the text. He is there the whole time.
Yeah.
But
No,
he
and I
just,
and no, go ahead, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I just find him really fascinating. And yeah, that's all.
Dude, no, I love all your work on Sauron. The your paper on the ring as well as sort of like a queer object, a queering object was really cool as well. Um, but like the one of my favorite things that you've presented is that femme fatale paper on Sauron, and like I get to teach the Crucible every year for my high school students, and Abigail Williams, right? She is the story's femme fatale, and I even get to like explore that with my students. Um, and it just gave me so much insight into that archetype and how it's kind of formulated and transforms throughout history. Um, yeah, it's just another way to say that your work's very transformational. But like what can queer gender and aesthetics do for us and the world, because obviously you were taking these things, unpacking the or pointing out the describing the femme fatale, and then kind of tracing its evolution over time and then connecting it to Tolkien, but like in a similar way, like how can those things help us with our everyday? Yeah.
I think there's two answers to that question, right? So the more direct answer is if we can see the patterns, we can correct the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
If we as consumers of media, as consumers of art, like this is something I was talking about recently with somebody, because at the end of the day, my passion is interdisciplinary arts, art history, art of the arts, all the arts. um, and one thing I was explaining was that our first language isn't spoken or written. Our first language is visual and auditory. Those are the two things from the moment we open our eyes, the moment we come out of our mothers, we hear and we see. And we start encoding sound and we start encoding visuals. And so it's really difficult for us to be able to disentangle those. It's much easier to learn what words are doing to us because we've had to learn how words work. We don't have to learn how to see. We don't have to learn how to listen. We just know. And so when something is so entrenched and so encoded in our thinking, it takes practice to learn how to spot the things, the visual cues. And this is why this is why an arts education is really essential. I think like we really need more media literacy, right? Like we need to be teaching media literacy, especially because we're constantly on an onslaught of media and we're constantly being onslaughted by media who wants our money
Right.
and wants our attention and wants our anger and wants our apathy. Um, we need first of all media literacy, but we also need an arts education because you learn how art if you learn how art is made, you understand the tools that are being used. If you learn marketing, you understand the tools that are being used to market to you. And one of the great things about art history, which is why that paper really was an art history paper, first and foremost, right? Is there is a continuous um, lineage of visuals in which we are all very aware of immediately, um, whether we are able to identify them or not. And so to be able to identify them is to be able to interrogate them. To be able to identify them is to not be fooled by them, is to not be made to believe that a constructed image is the truth. Um, the anyone who's ever studied photography or the history of photography understands that for a really long time, until Photoshop was much more common and people were doing digital manipulations, it was really well believed that a photograph was telling you the truth. A photograph is not telling you the truth. A photograph is constructed. Um, there's we like to believe that the things that we see are the truth. That is not, we are being told a thing. And so I think being able to understand the lineage of the codes that we are being given, like the femme fatale and like the visuals of the femme fatale. Salome, perfect example. We all know the visuals of Salome, whether or not we know that we know them. So um, it's really important to untangle that and to not sort of repeat these cycles of harm, you know?
Yeah.
And repeat this idea of like, oh, this sexy, beautiful woman is evil and trying to kill you. Like, um, the the other thing I think is more what is queer? We kind of touched on it earlier, right? What can queer theory and queer aesthetics do for us in the world? And I think that it is the past. It is a ticket to freedom in its own way because it asks you to question the foundations of what you have been told about gender, about sex, about sexuality, about visual identity. What is masculine? What is feminine? What does it mean to be masculine and feminine in a world? How fluid and how flexible is that? Once you start interrogating that, you see the house of cards kind of falls apart. Once you start interrogating it, you realize, oh, actually, all of these things are pretty arbitrary because there's a million exceptions to a million rules that we all just accept to be true. And I feel personally, like I know that there's a lot of people who feel really comfortable in a gilded cage, but wouldn't you rather just be free? Like, wouldn't you just rather be free and be happy and feel comfortable in your body and feel comfortable interacting with other people? Wouldn't you rather not have to be constantly worrying about posturing, about like, how am I not manly enough? Am I not man enough? Am I not woman enough? Am I not doing these things that are expected of me? Why does my boyfriend behave in this way? You know, like when we could just communicate like human beings, one to one. And I think queer theory sort of allows for that stepping outside of these boxes and these limitations that we put ourselves into and says, what if there's another option here? What if we can play games and have fun? And yeah, I think it's a freedom that, you know, the far right's afraid of.
Yeah. It goes back to questioning authority, right? And putting the power back in your own hands, right? And I'm even thinking about connecting it to Lord of the Rings and seeing how the scouring of the Shire is almost like this this moment of, okay, the power's in our hands, right? If I'm using queerness as like sort of a stand-in for like, okay, we're liberating the Shire from this, Sharky's authority, and all these things like that. So my mind just going, and
Yeah, and it's also like, let's also remember that like Bilbo and the way that Tolkien uses queerness to describe Bilbo and everyone who lives in Bag End, right? Is that if that's what queerness is, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts. Because
yeah,
Bilbo, he's eccentric, he's weird, he's everyone thinks he's a bit strange, and you know, something bad is going to come of this, and he's not abiding by our rules. He hasn't gotten married, and he lives by himself with a bunch of his nephews, and he's eccentric and has too much money and too much art. This is a very specific archetype. This is like the most very specific queer dandy bachelor archetype that you can possibly get. He's like on the nose. Um, but he's good. He's wonderful. Because he throws into question sort of what is expected in Hobbiton society, while also still being generous and still being beloved for his weirdness.
yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. Oh my god. Just the connecting that to the generosity to Bilbo as well is just amazing. Yeah.
I need to, at some point, I'm going to get it up. It was a conference paper for Oxenmoot, and it's like number one on my list of things to get up onto JTR. So, you know, keep your eyes open. I'll put it up there eventually when I have time. I did a paper for Oxenmoot a couple of years ago, which was about sort of Bag End as a queer found family space and how Bilbo sort of fosters this environment where hobbits who are kind of odd and don't quite fit into hobbit society can just be and learn and have fun um in a safe space away from the lobelias of the world. The fact that Mary basically closes the door on her and is like goodbye. And they just get to hang out together. Is really wonderful, and it's a space that Bilbo fosters. Um, he allows for education and art and beauty. He teaches Sam how to read, didn't he? If I remember
Oh
correctly,
yeah, oh
he,
yeah,
he teaches Sam how to read. Merry and Pippin, who live very far from Hobbiton, are there all the time.
yeah. Mary was like, yeah, I actually got to look into the Red Book of Westmarch, by the way.
Yeah, but like people don't realize if you look at the map, they live really far.
Yeah,
Why are they not at home? They're here. Think about that.
yeah,
Like it's and also Pippin's the only boy in a whole family of girls. And he's like, I would much rather be hanging out here with weirdo Bilbo than with my family. Like, yeah.
no,
um,
that's so I love it. People, so I won't put pressure, but for people who don't know, I think I've brought up Journal of Tolkien Research. But for those who are interested in just any type of Tolkien studies things, Journal of Tolkien Research is a great resource. It's online. It's open source. You can see conference papers and presentations in academic peer-reviewed journals or peer-reviewed articles and just book reviews. And I think you've got some stuff up there, don't you, Mercury, or no?
I do not yet. This
Okay.
is the problem because I have a bunch of conference papers that are sitting on a file and I need to put them up there, and I have not done that yet. I apologize. Um, I will at some point. I am going to be doing a review for them soon when that book eventually hits me, when it eventually comes out. Um, but other than that, mostly my stuff's in Malorn at the moment. Um, this is where I apologize for not having published as much as I would like to because I can only focus on one thing at a time. And I am focusing on thesis. Um, but yeah, it's hopefully I want that found family paper to be the first one that goes up on the conference section of JTR just because it's a counterpoint to all of the Sauron stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's important.
Hell yeah. Well, I know we're gonna be stoked, and I'm waiting for it. So, but no pressure, no pressure. So we talked about aesthetics, and you kind of brought that in, as in addition to the queer and gender stuff, but like you kind of bring that to some religious and theology in your scholarship. I'm particularly thinking of the femme fatale in particular. But like we've talked about how our shared interest in punk culture as well, because we're punk rockers and we're amazing. But how do you see these elements connected to your professional academic work? And then also, where do your scholarly specializations coincide? You've already given us kind of insight into the queer aspect of your life and those kind of converging in the professional setting. But, tell us about aesthetics and punk and maybe some other things that you want to add in there.
What do you want to start with, religious or punk?
Oh gosh, this is a question that's kind of an ADHD person wrote this question.
You gotta pick one first. I can start there.
Okay, bring in the religious stuff and then bring in the punk stuff.
Okay, that is a perfectly reasonable order. Um, to be frank, um, I don't have a great relationship with Christianity. Um, I'm an anti-Zionist Jew. I'm well educated in both the long history of European anti-Semitism and also the very new and present threat of Christian Zionism on our collective well-being as a planet, as a human beings, as a community of human beings, and all of that comes with it. Um, and most of so I try. I don't. I try not to get too theological when I do Tolkien studies because that is not my interest. And I do not want to be involved in that narrative, generally speaking. Um, that said, um, I have done a paper on uh, the Jewish coding of Tolkien's dwarves. That is going to be published at some point. It's a whole thing, but it is coming. It is there. Um, but my focus as a Jew and on my work with my Judaism is much more critical race theory and ethnicity and culture. It's not really religious. I'm very, very secular. Um, but I also do have a significant amount of knowledge about Christian imagery and visual rhetoric because I did an art history degree with museum studies.
Right.
You cannot do an art history degree on Western art that isn't 20th century and not know a thing or two about Christian imagery. It's constant, right? Um, so that's sort of my how I got to that paper. I got to that paper because I have an art historical lens and I know what the visual coding is, I know what the visual language is, and I have a substantial amount of knowledge about that. I approach religious studies in the way that sort of non-pagans approach Greek mythology. For me, it's much more interesting intellectually and historically in terms of cultural context and storytelling rather than spiritual practice. So that's sort of when I'm bringing theology into my work. It's with a historical bent. It's me going, okay, Tolkien, the Catholic, right, would have understood X, Y, and Z. How are we seeing X, Y, and Z in the visual language, in the rhetorics of sort of art making and art practice, rather than a theological treatise on, Saint Tolkien. I don't care. I'm sorry, I just don't. Um, One thing that's really interesting though, and how it intersects with my work now, because again, as I said, I try to avoid it. There's plenty of people who are doing Tolkien and theology. I don't need to be one of them. Um, but one thing I am kind of looking at the moment, which is really interesting, is so there's this like idea of Christianity and Catholicism, but more Christianity as a whole, in the West, very specifically in Anglo-American spheres, of this idea of like muscular Christianity, right? It's the kind of things you see with, I don't know if you heard about with Shia LaBeouf on the
Oh
pipeline
God,
of,
yes.
yeah. So there's this like huge like muscular Christianity movement, as it were. And people conflate Tolkien with that. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what Catholicism was in the first half of the 20th century. Um, the idea of muscular Christianity, and this is sort of the thing that I'm untangling here, is that because in order for the thing I'm about to say to make sense, I do have to give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
So, because this is deep historical stuff, I think a lot of people don't understand this, right? So, a lot of people will like think about the past in the way that they are currently seeing the world, but they're not actually thinking about the past within its own contexts. So, they're not thinking about what was Catholicism like late 19th, early 20th century. They're thinking, what's Catholicism like now?
Yeah.
Um, and Tolkien was not thinking like someone thinking now. He was thinking like someone who was raised in Edwardian, who was born in Edwardian. And the idea of muscular Christianity is Protestant in origin. It is this like it's originally Protestant, and it's important that it's originally Protestant. It doesn't become Catholicism doesn't take on muscular Christianity. It starts in the U.S. At the beginning of the 20th century, but it doesn't come to the UK for a while. Um, why this is important, and the reason why this is important to my work, is that a lot of muscular Christianity saw Catholicism as its antithesis. It saw it saw Catholicism as effeminate. It saw Catholicism as um, uh, for lack of a better word, degenerate and decadent, because those were the words that would have been used at the time. It saw Catholicism as weird and odd and other. And this is the environment that Tolkien is being raised in which it leads him to say things which are completely untrue, but he believed it. He says in a letter that he thought, Catholics in Britain had it worse than Jews. That's not true, John Ronald, but I understand why you think that. Like, it's nonsense, but I get it. But that's the kind of environment that he's in, right? That he is not part of this sort of like muscular Christianity Protestant movement. His sect, his version of Christianity is seen as other, it's seen as weird, it's seen as effeminate, very importantly seen as effeminate and decadent and extravagant. And what's really interesting, and this is something, mind you, this is still work I'm doing. There's a lot of, this is live work that I am untangling. So bear with me. What's really interesting, and the thing I'm kind of hoping to get into, is that there are a lot of substantial, well-known queer authors and artists from the end of the 19th and early 20th century who convert to Catholicism. Why do they convert to Catholicism? My opinion, my belief, is that they convert to Catholicism because, considering the fact that at this point, sex is a non-object, because very brief history lesson inside the history lesson that's necessary to understand this. There's a period in Britain between the Labouchere Amendment and the Wolfenden Report. So the Labouchere Amendment is a late 19th century, I believe 1890s, it might be 1880s, but I'm pretty sure it's 1890s, amendment that changes the law. Prior to the Labouchere Amendment, sodomy is illegal. You have to prove that. It's very difficult to prove. It's very, very difficult to prove that someone's had sex. There needs to be a witness, there needs to be evidence. This is why people like Fanny and Stella get off free, because they can't prove anything, and so they can just go. The Labouchere Amendment changes that. The Labouchere Amendment creates something called gross indecency. That's what gets Oscar Wilde. And gross indecency is this idea that you can just have the implication of sex that may be happening to get someone. Yeah, it's really bad. But the Labouchere Amendment makes things really difficult. It's how Oscar Wilde gets caught. Everyone cracks down. Everyone starts burning their letters. Everyone starts basically moving away or framing their life. There's a pretty good argument to be made that Bram Stoker got really homophobic to cover his own homosexuality after this happened. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. But then in the 60s, you get something called the Wolfenden Report, in which they are reviewing the rules and going, this is a stupid law. The Wolfenden Report is basically them going, queer people aren't hurting it. Well, they're saying homosexuals. Homosexuals are not hurting anyone. Why are we doing this to them? Is basically what the Wolfenden Report is. So in that period between the 1890s and the 1960s, everyone's locked down. That's an oversimplification. There are a lot of people doing a lot of things. But as a general rule, people are locked down. So you have a lot of people, in my opinion, and my theory on this, is that you have a lot of people who, if they're not having sex anyway, because sex is illegal, they might as well not be having sex in a place that is one, celebrating celibacy, and then two, fits within sort of like the aesthetic ideals of queerness, which is this idea of like aesthetics, high sensation, smells and bells, it's very emotional. Catholicism is a very emotional, extravagant, beautiful art form. If I'm gonna, the art form of Catholicism is really quite beautiful. And I can say that objectively. And so there's something that attracts a lot of queer artists to Catholicism at this exact time that Tolkien is working, and he is a very, very proud and avid Catholic. So I'm untangling sort of this a little bit. It's one of those things where it's like people say, Tolkien was a Catholic, he wouldn't have known anything about anything. And I'm like, you know nothing about history. Like, you just don't know history. at all. So that's kind of where there's a little bit of religious history in what I'm doing at the moment.
No, I appreciate you, doing the devil or what am I saying? Kind of wading the waters of theology and religious history, even though it's not your fave. I just think it's, this is more of a question because you're the art historian here, but dividing the Roman Catholic and the Protestant visuals, particularly of like the crucifixion, like
Mhm.
is like Roman Catholic art continues to keep Christ's body, right? And then it's
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Protestant tradition where it starts to be the violence of Christ's body is transferred, and then it overall starts to disappear from the crucifixion narrative in general, right? Visually, is that right, or is that wrong, or do you
It's
know?
so my knowledge of Protestant art is slim. I'm much more familiar with Catholic art because I just find it nicer to look at.
Yeah, true,
Um,
true.
uh, but that is true to a certain extent. From what I understand, I'm sorry, this is digression, but from what I understand, the main thing isn't the body of Christ. The main thing is displays of wealth.
Mm, mm.
So you have in Catholic art, it's very gold, it's very rich, it's very look at the whole point of Catholic art, right? And this is again an oversimplification, and I know there are people who are going to say, but you've missed this or you've misinterpreted that. I'm oversimplifying. Um, a lot of the point of Catholic art is to create a sense of sublime emotion. The whole point is you should be overwhelmed and awed by the presence of God. That's the whole idea, right?
Mm.
And so that's why you have lots of gold, you have lots of crying, you have lots of pietas, you have lots of sometimes quite horrifying imagery. Um, because it's supposed to put a sense of awe in your body. Um, I think that's my guess is that's something that Tolkien really loved about a Catholic church in general, because he's a man who's very involved. He wants to be put into this other world space, right? He wants to be put into this like world outside of the modern mundane horrors. And that's what he uses, what he does with fairy, right? Fairy for him is this like other world in which you can escape to that is so sublime that you cannot possibly understand it. But it's so beautiful and so rich and so real. And I think that's a lot of what Catholic art is doing. Whereas Protestant art is a lot more about clean lines and whites and lots of sort of like stripping back the wealth and going, we're going down to modesty. Protestant art is very much about modesty, whereas Catholic art is a lot more about sensation.
Mm.
And so you do eventually get, I would guess, again, I don't really know Protestant art very well, but that would make sense then that you start losing the body of Christ in that because you're going more and more minimalist, essentially. More and
Yeah.
more like modest, like the most one of the most famous things is like there's this whole genre of paintings that comes out of the Dutch masters because they're the big like we're the Protestants on the scene and we're making Protestant art. Dutch masters bore me so much, but people love them. People love them. They bore me to tears. Um, Not all of them. Doesn't matter. Um, but there's a really famous genre of painting that's just like the interiors of Protestant churches, and it's just they're beautiful. They're beautiful paintings, but it's a lot of white. It's a lot of like pristine, clean white. Because they're just trying to show off this like modesty, and that's why the Dutch that's why like people in golden age Dutch society. I'm sorry, my dates are terrible. I think it's 17th century. I think it's 17th century. I apologize. My dates are terrible. But they're always wearing black. They're always wearing black because it's about modesty. It's about Protestant conservatism. Also worth noting, they're wearing very expensive ruffs. So they're not doing modesty very well. It's like a whole thing about like they're actually showing their money in different ways because it's not culturally acceptable to show it in your clothes, in like your color of your clothes. So they're showing it in different ways. But yeah, that's basically the difference.
No, I love it. Thanks for indulging my digression there. So because I want to be respectful of your time, and I had a very in depth question. Like, could you briefly tell me maybe the sort of like I don't know, what do you see as punk rock about maybe engaging that aspect of Tolkien and art and the Roman Catholicism, and then we can after that we can go to our last question.
Yeah, I'm like, honestly, I'm having fun. So
Are you okay? Sick, sick, sick.
I'm having fun. This has been fun. I hope I haven't been rambling and making no
No, it's
sense.
it's awesome. So you take as much time as you want.
So I love everything to do with punk. As far as I'm concerned, queer is punk.
Hell
It's just
yeah.
a deeply fundamentally punk concept. Um, Asterisk, it's more complicated than that. But um, the punk is just kind of my whole life, man. Like, I know there's a lot of people who feel like you have to be punk is about the music first, music first, music first. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think that's true. Um, I I mean, like, obviously, I'm a pop punk guy. I've always been a pop punk guy.
Hell
Um,
yeah.
but I
Same at least.
also, yeah, I mean, that's our generation, right? Like, this is what we grew up on. We grew up on Green Day and Blink-182 and Fall Out
Yes.
Boy and Panic at the Disco and My Chemical Romance and Breaking Benjamin. Like, this is what we grew up on. Um, is it good music? Questionable. Is it fun music? Yes. um, but like I also love Iggy Pop and like I love the Dead Kennedys and stuff like that. But like I'm not really a metal guy. Um, I'm a musical theater guy. I'm a musical theater. But so I think it's reductive to say like you have to like XYZ kind of music to be punk. I feel like that's very anti-punk.
100%.
Like
100%.
like punk is a state of being, in my opinion. It's this
Yes.
like way of approaching the world in which you got to fight for your right to party, like,
Absolutely. Like as a
uh,
like in being in Tennessee, like Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton
hell
are
yeah.
punk, you know?
Oh, 100%. 100%. And this is why, like, this is great. That's why Johnny Cash's cover of the Nine Inch Nails song is just so good.
Yes,
Um,
dude.
it's so good. But yes, I agree with you. So that all being said, for me, I come to punk much more from aesthetics. And
Mm.
I come from like deconstructionism and like, what if we made things ourselves with our hands? What if we took a pair of pants that you've had forever, cut it up, sewed it into something else, made it look really cool, put lots of spikes in it, have a good time. It's aesthetics, it's great. And like this sort of like deconstructionist, reconstructionist way of seeing. And there's only one place that I think punk correlates with Tolkien, and I would love to hear alternative ideas, but for me, it's the fucking orcs, man. And like the really funniest thing to me, right? I'm urban. I'm from New York City. Born and raised in New York City. I love a city. I am a city guy. I've always been. Tolkien would have fucking hated that. Like I know that. He's not a city guy. He does not enjoy cities. He lives in like a town that is completely isolated from the outside world. um so of course he made the bad guys city folk. Of course he did. Um like Verlin Flieger makes a really good point that like the orcs speak like city folk. That's
Yeah.
just they speak like they're from the city. Um and like there's somebody that I know who is East Asian and from Birmingham and she's like, I know that I'm an orc. Like I understand that. Like but that doesn't make her stop loving Tolkien. Like you
Mm,
can have
mm.
that sort of I understand that Tolkien would not have liked me very much, but I'm okay with that. um and so I always find it really hilarious when people use orc as an insult to me specifically,
Damn.
because I'm also I'm Eastern European. My parents are from the former Soviet Union.
Wow. That there
Um,
that there's so many layers to that. Holy shit.
yeah, my parents were asylum seekers from the Soviet Union, and I'm also from a city. Yeah, I'm an orc. I'm aware of that. Thanks. Cool. Tell me something I don't know. Um, and also the orcs are cool. Like all art and all aesthetics of orcs have always been cool when they get past the racism part. But like just like the aesthetics of orcness is very like torn clothes and piercings and getting as punk as you can possibly get, you know? Um, so I just think it's really funny when people use that as an insult. And I'm like, okay,
That's
cool.
actually pretty badass.
I know. They're just this is why like I have a friend who on my phone is Shagrat and I believe I'm Gorbag on her phone. And I'm like, we just
Fantastic.
want a place of our own, away from all the big bosses. Wouldn't that be great? um, but there's like, so there's one essay. There's this one queer theory essay that is by Jess Battis. It's Gazing Upon Sauron. It's a post-colonial optic, and it is a real. It's one of the best. One of the best queer readings of Tolkien that there is, frankly. It's from 2001, I believe. It's quite old at this point. I think at the time that it happened, it might have been a little too radical for Tolkien
Mm,
scholarship. So it kind of, people reference it all the time, but it never gets built upon. I'm going to be using it in my thesis. I think it's very important. But
yeah.
one of the things that they talk about in this essay, which is very fundamentally punk, and I think this is very much a really interesting way of reading Sauron in this way that's very fundamentally punk, is this idea of Sauron's queerness is a antithesis to the rigidity of the elves.
Mm,
So
mm,
the way that Battis is sort of framing this in a post-colonial way, right, is saying if Sauron is the quote, let's be frank, Eastern Other, right? If Sauron is the Eastern Other, right, and the elves and men are saying, "Oh, this Eastern Other is bad and evil," we're not getting the Eastern Other's perspective on this. We're only getting the elves and the men's perspective on the person that they think is other and bad. That's not a balanced perspective. And so one of the arguments that Battis makes is much more also about how like the hobbits sort of sit in this middle space of also being other, and therefore queer and they're in their otherness, but in a very specific, like really good queer reading way, like really, really good. Um, because it balances both otherness and erotics in a way that is very good and is missing from a lot of Tolkien queer theory. The One of the things that sort of I'm badly explaining this essay, but like one of the things that it talks about is that like Sauron is threatening as a queer other because he doesn't abide by their rules, because he is a threat to the normative structures of elves and men. And because he is a threat to the normative structures of elves and men, he must be defeated. That is a very radically different way of looking at Sauron. And I don't think that was Tolkien's intention, but it's a really cool way to read it because reader applicability is also very valid. And like how we are once I mean, death of the author, right? Once the author has put the book out, it's no longer his property. So if you want to read Sauron in that post-colonial way, that makes the orcs even more interesting
yeah.
because it's like this like post-colonial pushback against the like rigidity of the quote unquote pastoral um conservatism, if that's a good way to put it.
I
It's a
think
good
so.
paper.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the resources there, especially just bringing in the punk rock elements. And I think that I think from conversations and things, I think we both have complex feelings about the Rings of Power show, but I think the aesthetics of the orcs is pretty freaking spot on, dude. It's so sick.
They gave us metal in a Tolkien production. I'm so happy about
Yeah,
that.
Damrod, come on now. That was with the metal vocals, unreal.
That
Unreal.
was, that was just like inspired. And like the orcs have always been metal as fuck.
Yes, dude.
It's just like I'm so into it. Give me that tank girl orc aesthetic. all day, every day.
So, the before we we've covered so much stuff from art history to freaking punk to the femme fatale and all this other stuff. But one of the like most exciting things that is on the horizon is the Oxford Handbook of J.R.R. Tolkien, which is edited by Dimitri Fahmy and Luke Shelton, who are awesome. And I know that you have a chapter in it, so could you maybe give us a little taste, a little teaser of what that chapter would is going to be like?
So a lot of the chapters, it seems to be a very, I can't tell you about other people's chapters, but it's very much sort of like a state of the field situation. It is a state of the field of queer theory and Tolkien studies, keeping in mind that Yvette Kaiser wrote one of these 10 years ago. So, no, not less than 10 years ago, 2017. Yeah. Yvette Kaiser wrote one of these less than 10 years ago in Tolkien and Alterity. It's a very, very good sum up. So, we are very much trying to not repeat what she says. So, it's much more sort of, if you want to know the state of the scholarship prior, the early versions of the queer theory Tolkien scholarship, go to Yvette. Now what's happened since then? Sort of what are the sort of major themes that people talk about when talking about queer theory and Tolkien studies, and where else can this go? Where do we go in the future with this? That's sort of the bullet point version of it. Yeah, I hope it's useful to people.
I think it will be, and I think that handbook is just going to be sick, and it's just like I said, when I found out that you were contributing to that handbook, I got super stoked. Just knowing people in our little section of Tolkien studies who are just doing badass things is just the best. It's the best.
There's some really cool people in there. Everyone's said on social media that they're in it. Claire Moore is in it. Sarah Brown is in it. Christine Larson is in it. Um, the Someone off the top of my head. So a bunch of people, lots of people are in it. I believe that uh, Alicia Fox Lentz is in it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Uh,
Tom
bunch,
Emanuel, I think
Tom
too.
Emanuel is in it. A bunch of people from Glasgow. So Marita Arviati is in it. I'm sure I'm butchering her surname. Taylor Driggers is in it. You should have Taylor Driggers on the show, by the way. Talk to
I
him.
have tried to. I haven't actually reached out to him, but I've engaged him before on the internet, and I have not gotten a response. So, but I would
I'll
love to
talk
have
to
him.
him. I'll talk to him.
Yes, please.
But yeah, Taylor Driggers is in it. Craig Francis is in it. Franson is in it. I'm really excited for that. Mariana Rios Montaldo is in it. Lots of really great people are in it.
And I mean, obviously, and you're among them. So,
Thank you.
uh, you,
I'm,
you know,
I'm very blessed. I feel very honored. I'm extremely honored to be asked to be in it.
yeah, it's killer. It's killer, and I'm stoked for you and stoked for the project. But Mercury, this has been just a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time to do this and just sharing your scholarship, your personal story, your Tolkien experience. It's just been fun. So, like, so if people hear this conversation and they're like, man, you hit all these places, like, what can they maybe expect in the future besides your thesis and maybe this book chapter, or maybe things that you want people to point people to? Where can they find your work, the internet?
That is
Give
an
us.
ongoing question. So yeah, unfortunately, I am neck deep in thesis at the moment, and I'm very bad at focusing on more than two things at a time. Um, I have a couple of papers in the endless academic pipeline. I'm trying to get better about writing blog posts. The most likely next thing to come out will either be a chapter I did 2 years ago now on Camelot 3000, the transmasculine narrative in Camelot 3000, which is not Tolkien studies. But that book is, who knows when that's going to come out. um, then there's the Oxford Handbook, which is going to be great. There are a couple of other things in the pipeline that I'm not able to talk about yet. Um, the best place to find me is, at the moment, Blue Sky is the best place to find me. I'm at Mercury Reads on Blue Sky. I do have a Substack. I am trying to figure out if I'm going to leave Substack, just
Fair.
because I don't want Nazis to be paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the problem is, as you know, when you have ADHD, having to constantly find a new platform is such a chore.
Yes.
Um, so I'm trying to figure that out. At the moment, I still have my Substack. Its folks are queerer in however you find Substacks. I believe Nick has my Substack. Uh, but I might be moving to somewhere else. I just haven't figured it out yet. And I'm trying to sort of force myself to write more blog posts and get more stuff out there. The most likely next Tolkien thing to come out is either going to be a JTR commerce paper, or I have a lot of information on Mary Renault and Tolkien that I'm sitting on because it's not thesis related anymore, and I thought it was. So that might get polished up into an actual paper. We'll see.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, sick, dude. This has been, it's been all the things. It's been pretty freaking punk rock,
Hell yes! That's all I want it to be at all times. This has been lovely, Nick.